The sharp crash of a shattered glass echoed across the crowded ballroom. Every conversation stopped instantly. Natalie Brooks stood frozen in the middle of the reception hall. One side of her face burned with pain. A red mark stood out beneath the glow of the crystal chandeliers. Standing directly in front of her was the woman who had struck her. Her mother. Not one of the more than 300 guests present that evening had imagined that a memorial banquet honoring a respected man would turn into a scene like this. But what shocked everyone the most was not the slap itself. It was the reason behind it. Just minutes earlier, Natalie had refused to hand over her restaurant to her younger sister. To understand how things escalated that far, we need to go back to the beginning. Natalie Brooks was 34 years old. If you met her in person, very few people would guess that she owned one of the most successful seafood restaurants in the Charleston area. She never liked being in the newspapers. She never liked showing off her achievements. She never liked talking about everything she had sacrificed to get where she was. 10 years earlier, Natalie had nothing more than an old food truck parked near the harbor. Every morning, she woke up before sunrise. She bought the ingredients herself, prepared the food herself, cooked every meal herself, cleaned everything herself. On heavy rainy days, customers were almost non-existent. Some days, the revenue did not even cover the cost of fuel. But Natalie never gave up, because there was one person who always believed she would succeed. Her grandfather, George. He was the only person in the family who saw her potential when she was still very young, while her parents treated her business dreams as a foolish fantasy, not with a fortune, just enough money to help her rent her first location. But to Natalie, it was the most valuable vote of confidence she had ever received. As the years passed, the restaurant grew. More customers arrived. Its reputation spread. Natalie expanded the dining area, hired more employees, and slowly transformed a small dream into a thriving business. Yet in her parents' eyes, that success never truly belonged to her. Because within the Brooks family, there had always been an unspoken rule. Lauren was the center of attention. Natalie was the one expected to sacrifice. Lauren was 5 years younger. Beautiful. Outgoing. The kind of person who naturally became the focus of every room she entered. If Lauren lost a job, their parents stepped in. If Lauren made a mistake, their parents fixed it. If Lauren needed money, their parents were always there. Natalie was different. Everyone simply assumed she would figure things out on her own, take responsibility on her own, carry every burden on her own. Over the years, Natalie became accustomed to it. She did not compete for attention. She did not complain. She did not try to change anyone. Until the day George passed away. His death brought the entire family together for the first time in months. The memorial banquet was held at an elegant hotel overlooking Charleston Harbor. Everything seemed perfect. White floral arrangements, heartfelt speeches, polite guests who spoke endlessly about George's kindness. But from the moment she walked into the ballroom, Natalie felt that something was wrong. Her father kept watching her from across the room. Her mother seemed unusually tense. And Lauren, who normally loved being the center of attention, was strangely quiet. As the evening continued, that feeling only grew stronger. It felt as though someone was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal a secret that had been carefully prepared in advance. Natalie had no idea what that secret was. But within a matter of minutes, she would discover that the gathering that evening had never been just a memorial service. It was the beginning of a plan that her entire family had been hiding from her for months. The banquet continued. Soft music still drifted through the ballroom. Guests continued raising their glasses, sharing stories, and reminiscing about George. But behind the door of a small conference room at the end of the hotel hallway, a confrontation was already beginning. Natalie followed her parents inside. She assumed they wanted to discuss responsibilities after the memorial, or perhaps some matters related to her grandfather's estate. But within minutes, she realized she was wrong. Her father, Thomas Brooks, closed the door behind them. Her mother sat down across from her. Lauren stood by the window, her fingers tightly intertwined with nervous tension. No one mentioned George. No one mentioned the memorial. Her father went straight to the point. Lauren was in trouble. Natalie was not surprised. That had happened many times before. What surprised her was what came next. They wanted her to transfer control of the restaurant to Lauren. The room fell silent. Natalie looked at each of them. She waited for someone to laugh. She waited for someone to admit this was some kind of joke. But nobody laughed. Her father continued explaining. Lauren needed a fresh start. The family needed to stay united. This was the moment Natalie should help her sister. The words sounded painfully familiar. For years, whenever Lauren found herself in trouble, Natalie was always the one expected to sacrifice. But this time was different. This was not a few $1,000s. This was not a temporary loan. This was nearly 10 years of her life. Natalie sat up straight. Her voice was calmer than anyone expected. No. Just one word. But it was enough to change the atmosphere completely. Her father's expression darkened instantly. Her mother took a sharp breath. Lauren lowered her eyes. Thomas stepped closer. He talked about family. He talked about responsibility. He talked about how selfish Natalie was being, but for the first time in her life, Natalie refused to back down. She repeated her answer. No. The argument continued for several more minutes. Then somehow it spilled out of the conference room and into the ballroom. No one could later agree on who opened the door first. But within moments, hundreds of guests realized something was wrong. Heads began turning toward the Brooks family. Thomas raised his voice again and again. Natalie's mother tried desperately to persuade her in front of everyone. Lauren stood behind them, tears gathering in her eyes. The scene looked perfectly staged, as though Natalie were the only person at fault. Then everything spiraled out of control. Her mother stepped forward. She looked at Natalie with a mixture of disappointment and anger. Then her hand swung through the air. The sound echoed across the ballroom. The wine glass slipped from Natalie's hand. It shattered on the floor. The entire room froze. No one spoke. No one could believe what had just happened. Then a voice came from the back of the crowd. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe she's refusing because she knows the truth. The man who spoke was Ethan Carter, George's longtime attorney. He slowly stepped forward. A thick file rested in his hands. Thomas's expression changed immediately. For the first time that evening, he looked genuinely worried. Ethan scanned the room. Then he said something that left everyone stunned. None of you know that Lauren owes more money than most people here could imagine. And none of you know that this family has been hiding it for years. Whispers instantly spread across the ballroom. Lauren burst into tears. Natalie's mother turned pale. And Natalie stood perfectly still, because in that moment, she finally began to understand. This memorial had never really been about George. Her restaurant had never been intended as a gift for Lauren. It was the family's last lifeline. And they had planned to push her underwater so they could save themselves. What Natalie did not know yet was that the secrets Ethan carried in that file were far more dangerous than anyone realized. And within a few days, the entire truth would finally come into the light. 3 days after the memorial banquet, Natalie sat in Ethan Carter's office. Beyond the glass windows, Charleston continued moving as if nothing had happened. But life for the Brooks family would never be the same. The file Ethan placed on the desk was thicker than Natalie had expected. With every page he turned, the weight on her chest grew heavier. The truth revealed itself little by little. Then, it became a storm. Lauren was not simply in debt. She had been borrowing money for years. Credit cards, personal loans, financial agreements she had never been capable of repaying. What made it worse was that Natalie's parents had known everything. They had not stopped her. They had not solved the problem. They had simply worked endlessly to hide it. Every time a payment came due, they used their savings to cover it. Every time a creditor applied pressure, they found a way to delay the consequences, until there was nothing left to sell, nothing left to mortgage, except Natalie's restaurant. That was the real reason they wanted control of her business. Not to help Lauren start over, but to save themselves from collapse. Yet the biggest shock had not arrived yet. Among the documents Ethan uncovered were records connected to the inheritance fund George had established years earlier. Long ago, George had set aside financial assets for both of his granddaughters. Natalie had never touched her portion. Lauren's portion, however, had disappeared years before. Not because of a failed investment, not because of a business venture, but because of debt. When that information became public, the people who had once defended the Brooks family suddenly fell silent. Apology calls began to arrive. So did criticism. The reputation Thomas and his wife had spent decades building started to crack. Little by little. Then it collapsed completely. Creditors came one after another. Lawsuits were filed. Only a few months later, Lauren declared bankruptcy. She left Charleston and nearly cut off contact with everyone she had once known. Thomas tried several times to meet with Natalie. He wanted to explain. He wanted to make things right. He wanted her to believe that everything had simply been a mistake. But Natalie had heard those words too many times throughout her life. This time, she no longer wanted to listen. She did not seek revenge. She did not try to hurt anyone. She held on to only one thing: her boundaries. 1 year later, the sun was setting beyond the harbor. Natalie stood on the rooftop terrace of her newly opened second location. The laughter of employees drifted up from below. Customers moved steadily through the doors. Life continued. The difference was that, for the first time, she felt free. She was no longer carrying responsibilities that belonged to other people. She was no longer fighting for approval from people who had never truly seen her worth. Ethan walked over and stood beside her. He looked out across the harbor and smiled. George would be very proud. Natalie gazed at the lights beginning to glow along the waterfront. Then she nodded softly. Maybe he would be. But more importantly, she was finally proud of herself. Because she had learned something that had taken years to understand. Family is not made up of the people who constantly demand your sacrifice. Family is made up of the people who respect your boundaries, even when they do not get what they want. And sometimes, the hardest decision in life is not fighting other people. It is finding the strength to say no to the people who taught you that your life belonged to them. If you have ever experienced something similar, or if this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional stories about family, betrayal, and the journey of reclaiming your self-worth, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Before we end today's story, remember this. Sometimes the people who ask the most from you are not the people who value you the most. Natalie spent years believing that keeping the peace was her responsibility, only to discover that true peace begins when you respect your own boundaries. Her journey is a reminder that self-respect is not selfish, and saying no can sometimes be the bravest decision of all. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between family expectations and your own future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more powerful family drama stories.